Okay, Grandpa, so we're going to start with the questions that I left you last.
Okay.
If you could, go ahead and just read the question and then your answer.
All right. Well, I'm going to start out with was I ever on TV?
Okay.
And the answer is yes.
What?
And let me explain how it developed. After our first trip to the Holy Land, which was a gift from the college or from the church, I went with a guy by the name of Dr. Collins. He led the group. Well, when I came back, people were so interested, they wanted to go. And so he had another trip coming up in the following year. And so he had a television program. And so he asked me to come down and be interviewed so that we could promote the trip. And so he had me comment on the trip that we had and the value of it, etc. And then to make some promo so that they could produce this over their religious program.
Mm.
So that was the only time I was on TV.
Wow. So it was, where did it air?
In L.A. It was he was at Bellflower Baptist Church there.
Wow.
Okay.
So did you go to a studio?
Yes. Yeah. He had a pretty good sized church, and he was very helpful to me and treated me with a lot of respect.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now the funniest situation or moment I've been in. There's more than one, but this is one of them. Someone brought up the fact that I dropped my trailer on the back of my motorhome and saw it coming down the road.
Oh.
And that was pretty funny, but it wasn't funny at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this one is in Ripley, Ohio, and I had my motorhome with a tow dolly on the back and a car on the tow dolly. And so there was no sign or anything on this road, and it went up a hill. Well, I pulled up, and I thought, well, I'll just go up and go across and come back down. Well, I got up there, and it was a dead end. And so I'm sitting there in the motorhome, and your grandma was over at the piano factory, which was an antique store, right on the main road, not far from where I was. But I had no way of communicating with her and her with me. But anyway, here I am, and you think you can back up a motorhome with a tow dolly on it. I got news for you. You cannot. No matter how hard you try, you cannot. You got two wheels on the back of the car that are on the road. You got two wheels on the tow dolly, and there's a swivel on both.
Yeah.
So every time you try to back up, it jackknifes. So you pull up, try to back up, jackknife. So I'm on this. I'm determined. I want to back this thing up. I don't know what else to do. So I start up, and one after another, people are coming out of their houses and standing there and staring at me, and I just kept trying. If I say, I just can't do it. I'm going to have to disconnect and everything. And just about that time, and it was hot, really, really hot, about 95 with high humidity. And a guy was off to the side. He came over and he says, "You need some help?" And I said, "Yeah, I really do." He said, I said, "If you can just help me because it's real heavy and I don't want it to get away from me once I disconnect it." And so what I did, I disconnected the trailer and the motorhome. And the tow car, and we just turned it until we got it off the road. And then more and more people started coming out. And then I pulled all the way down to the intersection, turned around, and backed all the way back up. Then took the tow dolly and hooked it on. And was able then to go where Grandma was.
Oh man.
One of the people said, "Well, don't feel bad. We've had charter buses come up here, full of people, and they get up here and they think they're going to come." And he said they have to back all the way down too. So that was probably one of my funniest situations.
That's funny.
Yeah. What was it like to leave home at 16? And what was I thinking during all that time? Well, leaving home at 16 was both challenging and adventuresome. You know, you're young and you think this could be, something special. But some of the things I had to deal with immediately was being responsible for all my expenses. My dad and mom didn't have any money to help me, and so I had to earn everything. I had a car, and I had to take care of the car, and I had to pay the rent and that type of thing, any clothes or whatever I had for school. The hard part was being away from the family. I'm a very family-oriented person, and in spite of many of the negatives that we went through in life, we were a very tightly bound family of 6 children and 2 adults. This was in 1952, 53, and I asked my dad permission to do this, and the reason that I did it was because they sold our house, or traded it for a farm, and it ended up, I would have been in a little, like, one-room schoolhouse out in Marcola, and I was trying to prepare to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty difficult to deal with everything. I had a job. I worked at the Eugene Drive-In Theater, and I worked every night except Tuesday. So I worked every night all through school. And then I worked on Saturdays, cleaning the yards of the drive-in just to make a little extra money.
Mm.
I also worked in putting in a sprinkler system in front of the drive-in, and I had responsibility to help count the money on the weekends and take it to the bank, and I was assistant to the manager at 16, 17 years old.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. The load I had in high school was college prep, and so it was pretty heavy also.
Mm.
And as I look back on it, the 2 negatives that I remember is I couldn't do anything with music because I could not be in a choir. I couldn't be in a choir with a choir practice.
Mm.
And as far as girlfriends were concerned, there was no room for that. I couldn't date. So I never dated all the way through high school.
Whoa.
And so there wasn't really much social life except where I worked. And then what I would do when I was not in school, on the weekend during the day, like a Saturday or a Sunday, I would go up to church, or I'd go up to the place where Mom and Dad had lived, and the kids. And about that time, 53, 52, work just dried up for Dad, and he went to California.
Mm.
So my mom was on her own for about a year or so with all the kids in the rain and mud. It was really hard on my mom. He asked me if I were to write a book and what it would be about and why. I think it's my experiences in planning first the church in Fairfield, and then planning the church in Palmdale. The experience of a church planter, and so
that'd be a good one.
I might do that.
Yeah.
And then I was asked if you could have breakfast with someone, any single person, who would it be? Of course, Jesus first, but the Apostle Paul. I would like to really pick his brain.
Yeah.
But I would, there's a lot of them. I would like to talk to Isaiah. I'd like to talk to Moses. I'd like to even talk to John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
But from the human perspective, I'd like to talk to my dad's grandpa. He fought in the Civil War for the North.
Wow.
And he and his brother Daniel, and his name is Albert, came out alive. They came out of it. But his brother Albert was injured. His brother Daniel was injured. And I have documentation as to the history in the war,
Wow.
etc. And I think I'd like to talk to my grandfather that disappeared. Well, nobody knows whatever happened to him.
Huh.
He was my mother's dad. And what happened there was, according to my mom's story, she was, I think, 7 years old or so. And that things were hard in Duluth. And that Grandpa went out to get some bread and milk. And no one ever saw him again to this day.
Whoa.
And so we don't really know what happened to him. I talked with his sister, Sophie, before she died. She lived in Tracy. And she said to me, I said, no hard feelings. I'd just like to know what happened. And she said, I would too. And if he lived, if nothing had happened to him, his mother in Norway was very close to Knut. And there's no way he would not have been in contact with her. And he came here when he was 19, came to America.
Wow.
Had 4 children. Uncle Richard, Uncle Norman, and Aunt Gladys, and Mom.
Hmm.
Now, the Oregon National Guard. That was quite an experience, I'll tell you. Like most boys in their teens, especially with the war around you as you were growing up, you always had this idea that, you'd like to be in some kind of a military thing. And we had selective service when I was still in high school. And the way that worked was you were in a draft, so that you could anytime be drafted into the armed forces of the United States. They did away with that, but at that time you had to have 3 years. And so the National Guard was promoting that. They say you can get your 3 years in by being a part of the National Guard. Well, the National Guard is connected to each state. They all have their own. And so I don't remember who talked me into it, but anyway, I had to get my dad's permission at 16, 17. 16. And signed up.
How did they feel about it, your parents?
Oh, they were for it, yeah. See, my uncle was at World War II. He, close to my uncle, Lyle, he was in Japan, at the occupation, and had another uncle that was a D-Day guy and got machine gunned in the legs and didn't last very long. But And so there's a high patriotic thing in those days. And one of the things that had just finished was the Korean War had just begun to wrap up. So you wouldn't end up in war. The unit that I was a part of, the Oregon National Guard, fought in the Second World War and received a presidential citation.
Wow.
In perpetuity. That is, everybody that became a part of it, and I don't know where it is, but I have a little badge that says that happened.
Cool.
So, it was really a growing up experience, and with a lot of young guys, like me, and older guys. Some had been in it for some time. Our first sergeant was an Army vet and then became a part of the National Guard. And so I was a highly motivated young man. And so when we had a war game, they made me radio man, which was a radio you hook on the back with an aerial, and weighed about 35 pounds, maybe 40, besides your pack, besides your rifle. So you could have 150 or more pounds on your outfit, because you have a shovel and what they call a half tent. It was really kind of an interesting thing. When you'd be out in the wild, you'd have half a tent, and you'd have to hook up with somebody else who had another half, and you'd put the two together and you had a whole tent.
Oh.
But anyway, we had the war game, and hot, man, it was hot. We were in Seattle at Fort Lewis, Washington, and they always have at the end of a war game, they have a summary. And so a regimental commander would get up and make a summary. And he commended everybody. And one of the things is I was over the top of a implanted explosive, and it went off just as I was right. My foot was right there.
Whoa.
And flipped me over. But besides that, he selected me out of the whole regiment and commended me for my valor and hard work.
Wow.
And so my sergeant and the unit I was in, my company, gave me a temporary corporal's position at like 16 years old.
Wow.
And in fact, in my yearbook, it says many times they would write to Acting Corporal Allee.
That's funny.
But anyway, I qualified with an M1 rifle, and you had to be able to tear it down in the dark and put it back together and make it operational.
In the dark?
Oh yeah, because see, if you're out in a war zone, they don't have a flashlight for you to fix your gun.
Right.
And by the way, you don't call it a gun, you call it a rifle.
Why not a gun?
Oh, it's a no-no. You just don't.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, they had some odd ways of making it stick. But anyway, I never made an expert, but I still had an eye issue, and I think if I'd have re-qualified, I would have. But I was sharpshooter. So acting corporal made it so that I was a non-com. And my sergeants had a brother that lived on Puget Sound. And so he came to me as well as the other non-coms and said, they're going to go out on the Sound on his brother's yacht. Would I be willing to go along? And I thought, yeah, that's nice. So I got on this converted Coast Guard cutter that was converted into a yacht, and one of the largest yachts then on the Sound, and off we went. The biggest issue in the military was two things. One was the profanity just takes off. And, you have boys using language they never used in their life. Their parents would never be happy with that. And the second thing is they broke the drinking rules.
Mm.
So you had guys underage somehow getting alcohol.
Yeah.
And so while I was on base one night, everybody was out. Everybody had gone. They'd gone drinking and carousing and going down to the burlesque houses down in Seattle to see we call them the hoochie goochie girls.
Uh-huh.
And but I was there by myself. I said, I'm not going down there, and I'm sure not going to the bars. So I'm sitting there and just kind of taking it easy, and I was pretty tired. And in walks a guy who is really sick. And he said, I think I'm going to throw up. And just about that time, we had all our rifles. They're stacked like this in a row. And he vomited all over the rifles.
Whoa.
And so the first sergeant, when he came back, got a hold of him and said, you're going to clean every one of those rifles, every last one.
Wow.
So that's one of the events.
Do you remember your first day in the National Guard?
Yeah.
What was it like?
The first day was that we went, you had meetings, local meetings, and they usually what they taught you was two things: obedience and discipline, and how to march. And they'd put you in rows and you'd march you to death. You just go back and forth, to the right, to the left, to the rear, and if you get your feet tangled up. So you learned how to do everything in harmony with other people. And the first day at camp, the sergeant, we got off the train, and we took a train ride from Eugene to Seattle.
Okay.
And it was another hot day. I don't know why it's always hot, but it was a hot day, and we had uniforms on. And they never are the right temperature uniform. That's one of the things you learn. They give you used boots, used socks, and fatigues that were different kinds, but they were not new. And even the rifles were from Korea and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, here we are, and we're kind of hanging around, and the first sergeant said, "Okay, we want to cut this grass," and he says, "Use your bayonets." Well, the bayonets were so dull you couldn't cut butter with them. I mean, until you get into a military situation, you have to sharpen them, and so they're just like a dull edge.
Mm-hmm.
So we're whacking away at these weeds, and I'm thinking, this is the dumbest thing. And I looked over and I saw there was a mower in a little shed right next to us. And being very wise at 16, I said, "Well, Sergeant, I got an idea." "Oh," he said, "what's that?" I said, "There's a mower right there. Why don't we just get the mower and mow?" He said, "Soldier, you're not being paid to think. You're being paid to do what I tell you to do."
Whoa.
It was the first lesson in obedience that you had to learn in military, because if you're not obedient, it could cost you your life or somebody else's, or both.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the disappointments was when I was on that boat, there was a chaplain who was drunk. And I had just become Christian. I just accepted the Lord just within the year or so. And he was on the back of the boat, taking empty whiskey bottles and dropping them off, saying, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And it so impacted me as a new Christian that I said, well, God, don't ever let me be a phony.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much my Oregon thing. And when I graduated from high school, I was coming to California. And so I went to my commanding officer, Company C, and said, I'm not going to be in Oregon anymore. And I said, I put in just about the 3 years. He said, you've been in long enough we can give you your 3 years exemption. So that's what they did.
Can you take me through your standard day, pre-colonel, pre-corporal?
Oh, you got up about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And there was trade jobs that you had to do. You had to make your bunk. You had to be able to take a quarter and put it on the bump like this and bounce up. If it didn't bounce, then you have to redo it until it does. They'd come in for inspection. They inspect your clothes. You stand at the end of your bunk. And after I had that commendation by the colonel, they put me on guard duty that very night, and I was just exhausted.
Mm.
And you cannot sleep on guard duty. That's a felony.
Wow.
So, but anyway, I made it. It was tough. You have to march. You're marching and through the night, back and forth, and it's cold or it's hot or whatever, and you go back and forth. And then the next day, I was on KP. Well, on KP duty, you had to clean all the pots and pans, and you did all the grunt work in the kitchens. Then they taught you tactics, and they taught you to take care of your weapons and to learn how to clean them, and then they took you to the firing line. Now the firing line was set up with targets at 100 yards, and they had colorful ways of saying things. It was ring to the right, ring to the left, Maggie's drawers. Maggie's drawers mean you missed the whole target.
Oh, okay.
And we had one guy that he had terrible eyesight. I don't know how he ever got in. He was partially cross-eyed, and he wasn't too smart either. So we were on the firing line. I was right two soldiers down, and he was trying to fire his weapon, but he was shooting from the right, and the only good eye was the left one. So he had his head all twisted around, and one of the leaders of the firing line said, "Soldier, what are you doing?" And he says, "What?"
Oh.
And pulled the weapon in his direction. And these are loaded. They have bullets, real bullets in it. And everybody hit the ground. And then the major that was running the whole thing came up and said, "Get that weapon away from that guy, and let's find out why he's here. He shouldn't even be here." And they took, he was done.
Yeah.
Because he was real. I don't know how he got in. I still don't to this day.
Man.
But then you go through your day. You have a meal time at lunchtime, and you do a lot of running and coordinating efforts together, and then you do that during the afternoon, and they have little breaks along the way. In those days, not everybody, but a lot of people smoked, and they would say something like this: "If you got them, smoke them," and you take a break. And I think probably it was mostly you learned the lesson of hurry up and wait. They get you hurry up to someplace, and we're going here, and we're going to get this done. And then you stay there for an hour and a half. So you have that. The coordination is very difficult in military.
Interesting.
It's a full day when you're in camp. In basic training, that's exactly. This is a condensed basic training. In the regular army, you would have weeks of this.
Yeah.
90 days or something like that. So that's pretty much what you did in the military.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Someplace I've got a picture of myself in uniform. I don't know where it is.
What?
Yeah, I went into one of those little things where you step into the make your own little pictures back in the day. And so I have a picture of me looking scared, but I wasn't.
Nice.
Okay.
Was that all the questions, or we got more?
No, we got more.
Okay, cool.
What was the most rewarding and challenging part about raising kids? The challenge. Control my negative emotions. That was a challenging thing, because my dad, when I was growing up, he never got angry very often, but he got angry at times, enough to scare you. And he disciplined me a number of times, more than the rest of the kids in the family. So you have a tendency to pick that up yourself when you have kids of your own. And so there were times I didn't do a good job of that, where it's called projection. I would be upset about something else and then take it out on Mike or take it out on your mom.
Yeah.
And I said the other challenge was to be a good example and a true Christian, and not to repeat the errors of my family, not to live a life that was inconsistent, and to teach such things as respect and perseverance and the willingness to never give up. Those things I tried to teach and did fairly well. The reward, they turned out to be great examples to their own family and epitomize the Christian life. Here's the last page.
Okay.
What was general morale like in the U.S. during World War II? And also, what normal day-to-day things completely changed that people today may not have realized? Well, we were coming out of the Depression, and of course I was very young. I was only from 6 to 10 years old. So you have to understand I was a child. But the things that had changed was there was work. Up at this point, we first of all were shipping all kinds of munitions to Britain so it would survive. And Dad was, we moved out of Minnesota because there was nothing. And I was a baby. We moved to California trying to find work. And he worked for Purex Corporation for a while, worked as a paper hanger and a painter and a carpenter. He did whatever needed to be done. But people, before we got into the war, people were pretty indifferent to the Second World War. They just didn't really want to be involved. And then Pearl Harbor happened. And it was like we were attacked like a sneaky thing. And one thing about Americans, they don't like sneaky stuff. And of course, then this is a foreign country where the people are different too. And so there was just fury. I mean, I remember Dad talking about people lining up to be in the armed forces. They just went down and recruited. You had people line after line of men, and they said, I want to be a Marine. I want to be in the Navy. I want to be in the Army.
Wow.
Sign me up. We're going to stop these guys. And so there was that, okay? Then there was a lot of teaching that was going on, propaganda, some of it, teaching concerning being a part of helping our boys.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in school we bought saving stamps that we put in little books that the money went for war effort. So you have a 10-cent stamp and you put it in the book and they take the dime.
Hmm.
Also, we were on rationing. And so you had only so much gasoline and only so many tires you could have, and you couldn't buy a new car because they weren't making any. All the cars were being given to the military. So they did have cars, but they were all military cars. You couldn't buy one.
Wow.
And then they would recruit everybody to do certain things. They had scrap metal areas where if you had any scrap metal of any kind, you would just put it, if you find somebody with a truck or whatever, you load it up and you take it over there. I don't know if there was any money that you made doing that. But you see, the Japanese had been using our scrap against us.
Hmm.
And that's part of the reason they were mad at us, because we stopped giving it to them.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that was one of the things. And the other thing was you had to save certain things. And one was string. I never did know what they did with the string. But you would find string and you'd put it on a ball and you'd wrap it around and then you're done. And then you find another piece of string, you tie a knot in it, and you keep doing it. And I'd had ball big as a baseball that I had gotten, and then I'd take it over to the I don't know what they called it back then. I was so young, but it was like a material. Thanks for material.
Yeah.
The other thing was more important was the aluminum foil. Now all the cigarette packages in those days inside were covered with aluminum.
Hmm.
And so you would go down the streets looking for cigarette packs. You take the aluminum, put them on a little ball that you had, or if there was some aluminum in the house or whatever, you'd wrap it with it or put it with it. So you saved aluminum, and then after you got a good enough piece, then you would take it in, and they would send it on. And it would be a part of a plane or of something else.
Huh.
And the third thing was bacon fat, which is kind of odd. And we all wondered about it, but we found out later. So you would, when you made bacon, you would have the fat, you'd save it, you put it in containers and take it in, and they would take the fat, and they made bombs with that. It's some way that it became glycerin, and they used it as a bomb.
Wow.
Provision. Let's see. While I was just a youngster, two events happened that I remember as a youngster. And one is one night there was sirens going off. And so we came out of the house to see what was going on. And there were searchlights, going up. This is before radar, before anything. And you could hear guns, big guns being fired. And we thought, oh, we're being invaded. Well, it was a false alarm, but they somehow thought that the Japanese were sending planes, and
Wow.
so they were searching. And for me as a boy, that was pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is my dad drove past Lockheed Burbank and was telling me about how they had disguised it. So he says, I'll take you over there and show it to you. So he did. And you had like a blanket of rubber with buildings on it that sat on top of the whole Lockheed plant. So if somebody in a plane who wanted to bomb Lockheed would not recognize it as the aircraft place.
Wow.
So I got to see that.
That's cool.
And also some of the installations on the shoreline where we had guns. And we did have submarines that came up close to the area. And in fact, the bombing that took place on the West Coast was incendiary up in the Pacific Northwest, trying to start forest fires.
What?
Yeah.
Huh.
They tried all kinds of ways to get that to happen. One of the things that I did, I had a good imagination. And as kids, we played war. Went to Vacation Bible School, and you didn't make Christmas trees and stuff. You made airplanes. German airplanes, American airplanes. And there just was a mentality. You had the other people were the enemy. You were the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And but one of the things that I did, we'd take orange crates, make wings with them, and make a fuselage, place to sit down in it, and we would pretend it was a fighter plane. And then my buddy would have one, and I'd have one laid out, and another guy would have one laid out. And who's going to be the German? I don't want to be the Germans. Who's going to be the Japs? I don't want to be the Japs. Well, somebody's got to be the enemy. Who's going to be the enemy? Well, I'll be the enemy this time, but not next time. So we would play, we'd play war. Okay, the last one is this one. What's my favorite memory and about each of my siblings? And it's not so much a memory as is an analysis. My brother Jack was full of fun. A little out of control at times. That was his personality. A great friend and brother. And a devout Christian who had great influence on me, and was one who suggested I go in the ministry, the first one who ever did, and who went deeply into Bible memory work, and probably one of the finest Christians I've ever known. Now, Gloria, my sister, I call her my sweet sister, with a strong personality. She has a personality more like your mom. She was very beautiful as a young girl. In fact, she had some handicaps at the beginning because of an eye issue and had to have surgery. But she was gorgeous, really was. And they elected her Grubstakes Queen in Yucca Valley. And she was on television in Palm Springs.
Wow.
Tim, loving and a person who tried and made many efforts to do different things, which brought on anxiety. It just made him, he would get real nervous about stuff. And I won't go into any of that detail, but that was part of his personality that he had to get through.
Mm-hmm.
He joined the military. He was in the Air Force. And he overcame a lot of obstacles. He married one of the girls in our church, and I performed the wedding. And whatever obstacles he ran into, he would work through them. Very proud of him. He became a great human being and example, and he provided for his family. Noreen, loving, so far with a caring heart, the most like Mom, I think. She faced many heartaches with faith, which even today, which could have broken many a strong person. When her husband was killed in a car wreck, her first husband, Mother went out to be with her, and she was not well. And while Mother was out there with her, she started having dizzy spells and bumped her head a couple times in trying to get in the car. And she came home, and my mother died within 30 days. So Noreen had to deal with that as well. Bobby. Well, Bobby was, I guess the best thing to say, he was his own guy. He had his issues, his difficulties. It was hard for him to learn. He had dyslexia, so he'd twist everything in writing. But I encouraged him to, and he had a problem with pronunciation, the very thing that Sarah is working with which they didn't have anybody to help him back then. But he had a gift of being able to draw and to do painting, and so he became a great artist. And he would always do anything for anyone. And when we were talking about him at his death, at the church where he went, one of the gals came up to me and said, every Tuesday he was here to hand out food. I get a little emotional, but that's...
It's normal, it's fine.
Yeah,
it's your family, you know?
Yeah. Anyway, that's all the questions.
Okay. Good answers, Grandpa. So, we left off. You just got to college. It was hot. You went to stand out in the rain.
Okay. I didn't know anyone. Everybody was new. I didn't know. I had met somebody who eventually came. They had a college career thing at first, for Long Beach Christian Church, and I met a couple of people who were going to go to the same school, and I did, but they weren't there yet. And so here I was, and it was really humid and hot, and they had a thing for freshmen, which was a kind of get-together. And one of my older friends has really dynamic bass voice, could sing well. But I didn't know him. I never met him. They said, well, let's throw together a group of freshman singers. And I had taken one singing lesson, and I've been in a quartet, back here in California. But I was not very skilled at anything. I couldn't read music. And I struggled with pitch and had to keep working on that all my life. Well, anyway, he said, "What part do you sing?" And I said, I'm a high tenor." "Oh, great." And so he said, "Let's get a group." So he was one of these, like to get everybody together. And I was like, "Nah, I don't want to do this." But the next thing you know, I'm the tenor in this group we threw together. And we sang a couple songs that I knew. And someone came up to me afterwards. In fact, she's still living and was at my 50th. And said, "My husband and I was listening to your voice, and we know what kind it is." And said, "It's 1 in 10,000." I said, "What?" I never heard such thing. I never did understand that. But he said, "We just really encourage you to get with Professor Barry and get into music program here at school because of your voice." And see, I have a very high voice. Mm-hmm. For a man, I could sing the high notes with the sopranos at that time.
Whoa.
So I could do, high C above middle C and B flat and all those way up there stuff.
Oh.
But anyway, so Larry, who was Larry Ferguson, was from Indiana. He became the bridge where I began to become connected with other people. And so we ended up that first year, Sunday comes. What are you going to do? Foreign country. And Larry says, "Well, I'll get Richmond to work it out so we can go with him where he's preaching." Mm-hmm. So that we did. And right at the first time out in the country, I tell you, I was completely disoriented back there. I'd never been out of California or Oregon. And we went to the Hollowtown church where he had just been hired again. And they had a great meal every time, and that was nice. And then the next week we went to South Liberty, which was, those are called halftime churches. So 2 weeks you would preach one, and 2 weeks you preach the other. And but then when we were at Hollowtown, he says, "Well, I held a meeting at Shinkles Ridge." And I thought, "Well, where is that?" And so he said, "Well, we're going to go and visit him." And okay, I'm in the car. I don't know. I found out later Shinkles Ridge was right near where Grandma's farm was. Mm. But back then, of course, I didn't know your grandma at all. And it was out of Georgetown. But anyway, that's how it all began. I began to build relationships with people, and I took Greek the first year. They talked me into it. I quit about every week, and Frisney, the Professor Frisney, is the one that probably had the most influence on me over the years, because he just took an interest. And I'm from far away, and Charlie Bill comes the second semester. Here's the two of us, in a foreign country, really. Ohio was like a foreign country because it was just a different world. I just never been in it. And so my freshman year was a struggle, and it's a lot of detail that I'll go into later.
Okay, cool.
All right.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.